For this project, you want to make sure that you have the alphabet mold that is the correct way up, not inverted. For the first layer, I'm using some black diamond pigments. I'm using a Starry Night Galaxy, which is sort of glittery, and also a color shift one that is called Mystic Green Blue. It sort of has a little bit of a holographic look to it, I suppose. For the first and second layers, I'm using a 2-part resin, and the resin that I use is Nerpa. Because we're going to put lots of pigment in these first 2 layers, we do use the 2-part resin. Otherwise, with UV resin, it just doesn't cure very well. So I mix up my 2-part resin here, and then I'm going to add this Starry Night one. It's sort of black, but it's very glittery. You actually need quite a bit of it to get some real color, as it's almost more like a really fine glitter than it is a mica powder. So I start with 2 scoops. In this tutorial, I'm using about 6 milliliters of resin for the whole entire alphabet. Now I'm going to also add the Mystic color in there, just a little bit of this. It's just enough to kind of give it a little bit of a color shift. You, of course, do not have to use these same colors. This is just what I'm doing. I want the back layer of these, which is essentially what you're starting with, to be not super translucent, because I'm going to be painting things and adding more things to the next few layers. So I start with these quantities, I give it a little bit of a mix. You can kind of see when I do that, the shift in the mica there, in the Mystic Green Blue. So I'm going to mix it up, and then I sort of use my judgment on whether or not I think it needs more. The best way to know how translucent it is to kind of hold it up, and if you still see a lot of light through it, then it is translucent. So as you can see here, you can still see the wooden stick. I do want it to be a little bit more solid, so I'm probably going to come in with a little bit of black liquid paste as well, just to make it a little more solid. But you can see how that Starry Night and that Mystic Green Blue work together to kind of create a really cool look. I do want it to be a little more solid, so we are going to add a little bit of black liquid paste to it. Now I'm choosing this one because the mica powder does still have a lot of, I don't know, translucency and glitterness to it, whereas this is more solid black. So I start with just a couple drops. It's always easier to add more than to accidentally put too much to begin with. So we'll start with 2 drops. We'll see where that's at. Again, use your own creativity. You can use whatever colors you want, and if you want yours to be more translucent, then that is entirely up to you. We don't have to do things exactly the same. This is still a little bit too thin for me, so we're going to still add a little bit more black, and until I get it right, I just keep experimenting. I'm happy where this is at now. You could also add some glitter at this stage if you want. I have black glitter. I'm not going to put it in, but you can if you like. Okay, I apologize, as I thought I hit record when I started filling these, and I did not. But what we're doing, we're just putting a thin layer for each letter. We don't want to go too thick, as we have more layers to go. This is just kind of our spacey background, so just a thin layer, just enough to fill in each letter, and then it's going to have to cure overnight. A quick little spritz with some rubbing alcohol to get rid of bubbles, and there is our base layer. Base layer all done. You can see the lovely little sparkle and color shift that has, and now these need to sit for 24 hours. Next step is stars. Now I use white spray paint. I do about a half a little pump just to get some stars on here. You could use a toothbrush and acrylic paint. For me, this is the easiest way, and I just do kind of a little half pump. A little bit of a spritz just to give a sprinkling of stars. Now, I know you're thinking she's ruining her mold by putting that paint on there, But have no fear, because all I do is I take a little bit of duct tape, or in my case Gorilla Tape, and those little stars come right off. Completely optional step, but I love details. So we're going to hand paint a few little starbursts on each one of these. I use a really fine paintbrush and white acrylic paint. Don't use oil. And you can kind of just pick and choose where you want to put these little stars, just to kind of give it something a little different. Jazz it up, so to speak. I'm just going to do one of these starbursts per keychain because we're going to add some other details as well, so we don't want to fill them up too much with these. I want these keychains to look different than the typical glitter-filled galaxy ones, so we're going to do some more hand-painted details. I'm using a bright apple green. You again could choose whatever color you like, and we're just going to do a little swirl nebula type thing on each one. I really believe in experimenting and doing whatever you like for your creative freedom. So honestly, you could hand paint any details you want in here. If you want to do an alien, a spaceship, whatever, have at her. This is the layer where we're adding all these little hand painted details. You don't have a lot of room, so you might not want to get too crazy, but they definitely add to the depth and make things just a little different than the usual stuff that you see out there. I also want to add a planet. We're going to go with red, or I guess it's a burgundy wine, and I use the end of a paintbrush for this. Little dots. You could use the regular part of a paintbrush too, but I find that this is just really simple and easy. Put a little paint on my palette, use the bottom part and dip it in, and just do your little dots. I'm going to do one per letter, just like everything else. You could very much do color coordinated galaxy letters here, doing sort of all purples and pinks. You could go with just oranges and yellows. So color choice, it's all up to you. Glow in the dark time. I've got this really nice purple glow in the dark. It doesn't have color to it, so I also add the purple haze from Black Diamond to this one. I've got a really bright sort of orangey pink. I've got a bright neon green, and I've got a blue. I will link to where I've got these in the video description. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I really like things bright. So with the glow in the dark colors, I actually go quite heavy with the pigment. I know a lot of people say that it won't cure properly, but again, we're using a 2-part resin. I have never had an issue. I do like them bright. I like them to be vibrant, and I really want them to glow. You don't need very much of each color, so I've just got a little tiny bit in each cup, especially with 4 colors that we're adding and little tiny keychains. These vivid glow-in-the-dark pigments I get on Amazon, they are absolutely amazing. A lot of them come with no color to them. They say the color that they are when they glow, but they are white as far as the powder goes. So this purple one, I add a little bit of the purple haze to it just to give it some color, but these glow amazing. When it comes to adding some regular mica powder to the glow in the dark, I try and keep it a little bit less because you don't want to drown out the glow properties. So I guess I would say it's about 1 part of the mica powder to about 3 parts of the glow if I had to guess. As you can tell, I'm more of a guesser than an actual measurer. All of our paint details are down, so we are going to go in with a 2-part resin again and just do a clear layer. We don't want to fill these too much because we still have to add the glow in the dark, so make sure that you leave a little bit of room. You don't want to overfill the edges here. Once all the clear resin is poured, we're going to go in there with just a tiny bit of each of the glow colors. We're going to dab it, we're going to swirl it. It does not matter. These are going to be our nebulas. You can do a line, you can do a swirl. I try to not cover up the painted elements too much because you don't want to hide them now that you've spent all that work painting them. If you do, it's okay because you'll see in a few of the next steps how we can still fix that. But go in with each color, just little bits. You do not need a lot here. It is perfectly okay to overlap some of these colors because we're going to swirl them together. So if you've got colors that mix well, go for it. Now we need some white alcohol ink. I love the Jacquard Products Pinata. I refill just a tiny bottle, so this little bottle isn't the actual brand. We don't want to use the dropper because it's too big for these, so I put a little bit in a little container. This is actually just a lid from some glitter. That way I'm not dropping big drops. I use a toothpick. You could use anything with a fine tip, and we're just gonna go in really lightly, dip that toothpick in the alcohol ink, and we're gonna swirl it in everywhere that we put the glow in the dark. You don't need a lot, just a tiny little bit. It's gonna act like alcohol ink does, and it will start to create some cells and separate a little bit. So go in, swirl, dot, whatever you want. Again, creative freedom. I know I say that all the time, but it's what you want to do here. Think outer space, think nebulas. Have fun with this part. If some of the colors swirl together, it's okay. Every little piece is going to be a little bit different. It's all going to be unique in its own way, and sometimes those blended colors look really awesome. When I make galaxies on my wooden pieces, I always go in with a heat gun to manipulate the alcohol inks. Obviously, we don't want to do that because we don't want to ruin our mold, but we can still work on manipulating this a little bit, and we can do it with a straw. Now, nobody go and pass out on me, but we're going to use that straw, and I just kind of blow into the resin a little bit just to move it and shift it, almost the way you would with a heat gun, only this time we're using air power. So here is where you can go in, and if you have covered up a planet or one of your hand painted details, just come in with the straw and blow the stuff the other way. It doesn't really matter. The cool thing about the alcohol ink is once this has sat for a few minutes, it does actually start to create some cells, and it sort of separates a little bit. So it will change from what it looks like here. This is how they look when I've just completed that step. I'm going to come in with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, give them another little spritz just to make sure there's no air bubbles in there, and then I'm going to let them sit. As you can see, once they've sat, some cells form, the alcohol ink changes a little bit, and they just look a little bit more like nebulas. Now, these need to cure overnight again. Today is going to be our UV resin day. So we can take these out of the mold now. We don't need them in there anymore. Not only are we going to dome these today, but we're also going to add a little bit more artwork. Why? Because trust me, when you do layers like this, the depth is absolutely amazing. The backs of these looks really awesome too with that color shifting pigment and the sparkle. I probably should have remembered to spritz my mold with some alcohol ink to get rid of the micro bubbles, but I forgot. Before we go in and do anything, we want to make sure we don't have these sharp edges. There's always a little bit of a lip because they've been made in the mold and we didn't fill the mold to the top. I find that sanding is the best way, and I go through on every single one and I just sand right across the top with a little hand sander and take those sharp corners and any sharp edges off. You also want to make sure after you've done this that you clean off all the dust. If you leave the dust on there, you're going to have a lot of trouble when you go to put the resin on. As you can see, we've now got nice smooth tops. It's going to make doming a lot easier and you're not going to have those sharp edges sticking up. Another layer of stars, why not? So I'm going to go in one more time with my little half of a spritz with my spray can and give these another little dusting of stars. Again, it just adds to the layer effect. I want to put another planet on here, and I think these could use some bright blue. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with the red planet, where we're going to use the end of a paintbrush. We're just going to dip it. I made this paintbrush a little bit bigger just so that this planet is maybe a little bit bigger. It's going to add to the depth having different sizes. So each letter going to have another little dot, another little planet. If you really want to get fancy, you could add some polka dots, some stripes. You could even paint a little green on there and make it look like Earth. But I'm just going to stick with some solid dots for now to keep this less complicated. I like to place the elements in my final layer of painting in areas that maybe don't have much, or over an area that has too much solid color, or even if you have a flaw, it's a great place to cover up flaws with this. Personal preference, I figured this needed some yellow, so we're going to go in with cadmium yellow and we are going to paint some little comets. These are actually a little bit tricky. I wish I had a finer paintbrush than I'm using here, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to paint a little comet on each one. It just adds that little kind of finale, a little touch that people love. It's doming time. I have a preference for the Diction UV resin. We just are going to go in, do a nice clear layer of that UV resin on each one. This is when your colors are really going to pop. It's hard to show in the video, but as soon as you add this final layer of resin on there, everything just becomes brighter. You want to make sure that all that resin has been taken out to all the corners and that you've covered the whole top. I have a cheap little plastic tool that came with a kit that I didn't even know what I was going to do with, and that's what I'm using here. But there's all kinds of tools that are similar to this that you can use. There's some that are specific, like silicone pens, or gosh, if you even want to use a toothpick, that will work too. You can't really tell in this video that I did it, but I hit these with a torch to get rid of micro bubbles, and then under the UV lights they go. I would say I probably do about 2 minutes just to be on the safe side. Once that UV resin has cured, we're gonna add the hardware. So I use a tiny little drill bit and I drill just a short little hole. You do not need to go very deep on this. They can be quite visible if you go too deep. I kind of go in and out just a tiny bit because the next step I do with my hands, so I want to make it easy. If you do these right after they've cured, then it's actually a lot easier because the resin still has a little bit of softness to it. So I drill up and down, make sure I get all that resin dust out of there. Then we're going to add in the little screw. As I said, I do this by hand. Anytime I've tried to do it with pliers, I end up breaking them. So I go by hand, do it when the resin's still soft, and it's actually fairly easy. At this point, you can choose whichever hardware you like, and you don't even need to make these keychains. If you want to turn them into magnets or jewelry, the choice is yours. It is just an alphabet. It doesn't have specifics that it's meant to be keychains, so feel free to make these into whatever you like. And there is your galaxy keychain. It is so hard to show in video. These have amazing depth. With all those layers that we've created, you can literally see into them. I hope you give these a try, and I would love to see if you put your own spin to them. There are so many things that you could do. They're so fun to make. Here's how they glow in the dark. Isn't that amazing? So if you decide to make these, please give me a tag. All my socials are bouncing off the walls, and I'd love to see what you come up with.